listener production.
Hi, Natarsha Belling with you and welcome to the afternoon edition of The Briefing. Coming up in our deep dive, the latest on the so-called ISIS brides who want to return to Australia with their children. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese says he has no sympathy for the group, saying his government won't be providing assistance or repatriation. We chat with an expert about what risk these families really pose and how we can better manage the danger of radicalisation. But first, let's check the afternoon headlines this Tuesday, the 17th of February. Investigations are underway after a former NRL star was seriously injured in a drive-by shooting outside his family home. 44-year-old Matt Utai was shot a number of times by occupants in an SUV in Greenacre in Western Sydney around 6 a.m. this morning before they sped off. Here's Superintendent Rod Hart.
We believe this was definitely targeted. Whether the victim was the intended target or it was somebody that he knows or associates with or is related to will all form part of the investigation.
Matt was shot in the chest and leg and has undergone surgery. A burnt-out vehicle suspected to have been used in the shooting was found in a nearby street. Police are believed to be investigating his son's connections to a notorious crime family. Meantime, one person has been killed and two others critically injured after a random stabbing attack at a busy shopping district in Western Sydney. One man was stabbed in the neck and a woman suffered injuries to her chest and abdomen, with witnesses saying they could hear terrifying screams. A man has been arrested, with Superintendent Simon Glasser saying it was a random attack.
The alleged offender is known to police for petty crime and a number of mental health incidents. He's not linked to the address he was located. However, he is a local to the area.
And YouTube star and wrestler Logan Paul has smashed records by selling a super rare Pokémon trading card for $16.5 million at auction. He purchased the card, which is only apparently one of 39 created in the late 1990s. It's believed he's made more than $8 million in profit. Paul calling the record-breaking price, quote, absolutely insane. Now it's time to get into our deep dive on the latest controversies surrounding a group of so-called ISIS brides wanting to head back to Australia. Joining us is Countering Violent Extremism expert Peta Lowe, who explains how the government needs to change its way to crack down on radicalisation and why we all have a role to play in curbing extremism. Peter, thanks so much for joining us. Tell us about this latest group of, we understand it's about 34 women and children who were attempting to leave a refugee camp in Syria as they try to return to Australia.
Yeah, so what we know about the situation in northeast Syria around Al Hol and Al Roj camp, which have been security-wise managed by the Syrian Defence Forces since 2019, is that security has really fallen down around these camps and a number of other places. We've seen the US supporting Iraq to move all of the prisoners from the prisons, and the camps are no different. So security there has failed in the sense that they're no longer able to keep these people contained. And so individuals are leaving. Many individuals are leaving. And this group of Australians were trying to get to Damascus, to the Australian embassy in Damascus, so that they could get consular assistance to return home.
Considering the volatility and the clear risks these women and children are facing there at the moment, how dangerous is it for them to stay in these refugee camps?
Yeah, I mean, at the moment, that part of northeast Syria is not stable really at all for anyone. There's ongoing conflict between the current Syrian forces, the previous security forces, and loads of other militia groups in the area at the moment. It's a very contested part of the Syrian country at the moment. It's not really safe within the camps. There's also a lot of recruitment and expectation of people engaging in conflict from within the camps against security forces and also from security forces against the camp as well. So there is a lot of conflict and it's never been a very safe part of the world to be in. It's even less so currently.
And in regards to the conflicting reports coming out from the ground there with the refugee camp, we understand the camp's governor has reportedly told a journalist in Syria that the Australian government, and I'm quoting here, had issued passports and the necessary documents for the families and informed them that their relatives to receive their loved ones from the camp. Now, the Prime Minister, Mr Albanese has come out saying we have a firm view that we will not be providing assistance or repatriation. So what's the truth here?
I mean, these individuals are Australian citizens. So like any other Australian citizen, we are required, and many other countries too, to not leave our citizens stateless. So, I mean, we have a responsibility, if they can prove that they're Australian citizens, to provide them with the passport to travel. Not repatriating means the Australian government isn't going to send Australian government personnel or anyone else into that area to collect them and bring them home. But as we've seen recently with the women who made it into Lebanon, if they can make it to an Australian embassy, then like any other Australian citizen, they are able to return home via their own means with Australian documentation.
We understand a number of these women and children do have links to the failed ISIS terror groups. Many people are saying, and we know there's politics at play at the moment, many people are saying that these women and children coming back to Australia pose a serious security risk. Do you think there's any validity to those concerns?
Look, I think those concerns have to be taken into consideration. I spent a couple of years in Iraq working on the repatriation of Iraqi citizens from these camps back to Iraq. And certainly one of the things I learnt through that and through a lot of research into that population is even if people were ISIS affiliated at the time that they went into camps in 2019, it's highly likely those views have changed. If they went into the camps not ISIS affiliated in 2019, it's also possible those views have changed. So the reality is we just don't know until we can actually do a proper assessment of those individuals, which I've been arguing for a very long time now can't happen in those camps. And we saw that with the returnees 2021, the women who returned then. You know, there's varying views and varying politics at play in the camp that make assessment of people in that camp not very reliable either. The reality is if they're Australian citizens, they should be brought home. They've been held without charge in these camps now since 2019. We have a responsibility. If they're Australian citizens and they broke the law, then they should come home and be charged with the foreign incursion laws that we rightly instated, and they should follow that process of justice. But it's not okay that we just leave people because it's too complex or too difficult. If they're a risk, we have the mechanisms in this country to manage the risk. And the reality now is that we can't put it off any longer. They are likely going to find their own way home because they're not currently being held by security around the camp anymore. So we have to deal with it at some point. The question is, how organised and coordinated are we going to be in dealing with it? Or are we going to wait till it lands on our doorstep and then try and be reactive about it then?
Great point you make there, Peta, because you mentioned before they are Australian citizens. They have a right to re-enter their country again. Is the government better off being able to control the unknown to some capacity rather than just turning a blind eye and saying, we have no sympathy for these women and children at the moment, not our problem?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's quite simplistic to say we have no sympathy for them. We don't actually know the stories of how they ended up there or, you know, where they're at actually in regards to their ideological beliefs or understanding now. And I think that does make a difference to us. I understand that Australians are confused by the fact that we would even entertain this, but they're Australian citizens. And one of the things that makes Australia great is our commitment to our values and our beliefs. And one of those things is that Australians are Australians. Now, if they've done the wrong thing, then they come back and they face Australian law. They've not been charged with anything in Syria. They've not been found guilty of any offences in any other country. They've not been prosecuted. They've not even been investigated. There were many Iraqis I worked with who were in camps in our whole who were never ISIS affiliated. They fled conflict and they ended up in the same camp as Islamic State followers. They never did anything wrong but were detained just the same. And so I think it's on us now to actually follow the principles of justice. The things that separate us from the extremist groups are that we have a foundation in rule of law, in principles of justice and fairness. And I think we have the processes in this country to manage that in a more sophisticated way than simply saying we don't agree with what you did, so we're not going to help you at all.
Peta, just to unpack the situation that some of these women and children have been in when they've left Australia to go to Syria and have been, in some circumstances, forced into these marriages, often they are not making these choices, especially the children in these very volatile, dangerous scenarios.
Absolutely. I think that's what strikes me the hardest about this is none of those children made any decision to be where they are or end up with that. And in fact, some of them were born in those camps. And I think for us to say, oh, well, that's their bad luck to the parents that they were born to, I don't think that demonstrates the humanity that I think we'd like to think we have as a country, where we think about the impact that things have on people. Some of the women made choices, some of them did not. And I think in order for us to be fair to the group, we actually need to respond to them as individuals and their individual circumstances. I mean, that's the way we would all expect to be treated, not lumped in with a group of people, but considered for our own individuality and the things that happen to us as individuals. And as I said, we have really strict laws in this country. Foreign incursion laws were written for a reason. They were written so that if people were found to be in a place that we made unlawful for them to be, we could prosecute them. So if we have evidence to suggest these women did that, then we should go through the principles of natural justice. They should face a trial. They should be able to mount their own defence. And then a court makes a determination about whether they're guilty and if so, what penalty they should pay for that. That's the way we manage things in a civilised country, even things we don't agree with. And for me, that's what separates us from the extremist groups who like to think that they can just put everyone in a bunch, say they're all evil, and therefore it's okay if we kill them all. That's what we don't like about extremist groups. And I think in this case, it's our opportunity to very clearly demonstrate that we do follow those principles, that we are committed to the principles of human rights and humanity. And in order to do that, we have to look at each of these individual circumstances. There won't be two stories that are the same.
We know, Peta, and you know better than anyone, that radicalisation and extremism is a big issue, that there's also been allegations of the failure of some of our anti-terrorism agencies in what happened in Bondi. How do we ensure that wherever that extremism or radicalisation is coming from, how do we ensure that we're keeping on top of it?
I've said this for a long time now. We can't leave it to intelligence and law enforcement agencies alone. It's a shared responsibility that our communities are safe. It doesn't come down to just law enforcement alone. And for that, it means we all have to get a bit educated and we all have to understand a little bit more what violent extremism is and how it occurs. I've worked with lots of people who've taken extremist views who are otherwise what people would consider good people. It's a certain set of circumstances, both inside that individual and external to them, that puts them on this pathway, makes them really vulnerable to the recruitment of extremist organisations who particularly target vulnerable people. And it means that what we end up doing is demonising something which is the result of, in some cases, quite human responses to different circumstances. So I think it's also about us all understanding what can we do to be helpful or unhelpful in terms of making sure that as few people as possible are required to be dealt with by the law. There will always be people who require disruption, who require detection, who require prosecution, and who require custodial sentences to keep the community safe. I don't believe that we'll never be in that situation, unfortunately. But what we should be in a situation of is that that's the minimal number. That's very few. And the majority of people we can actually identify, engage with early, and divert away from that pathway where that's the only answer for them. That means that the job of security and in law enforcement become a bit easier. The numbers are smaller. We're helping them in a lot of ways, but also we're reducing the things in communities and in society which contribute to the number of people we're seeing radicalising right now. And that's the division. That's the polarisation. That's the in-group and out-group ideology of extremists, where we're allowed to treat people who don't think the same way that we do in ways that we wouldn't treat the people who think the same way as us. And that's, I think the scary thing right now is we're seeing much more normative polarisation, many more people in the community who are agreeing with this very binary view of what's right and wrong. And if we can't start to educate and bring the grey and bring the human back into some of these stories, we're going to find ourselves in very, very difficult circumstances over the next 10 years.
I'm glad you've mentioned the grey, because there is so much in so much of what we're dealing with at the moment. Peta, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for your time.
That was Countering Violent Extremism expert Peta Lowe. And that's it for this episode of the afternoon edition of The Briefing. We'll be back in your feed tomorrow morning with a deep dive on the ethics, pressures and principles of defending a terrorist. We'd love you to subscribe or follow us on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. I'm Natarsha Belling. Thanks for your company.
You've shown no remorse or apologised for her death.
Hi, I'm Alison Sandy, National Investigations Editor at the 7 Network.
He was the last person to see her after they had an argument at their family home.
And I've got a new podcast out.
I've got nothing to say to you.
Kiss and Kill is a deep dive on some of the nation's most notorious killer narcissists and expert abusers.
Very deliberate manipulation.
Examining their telltale signs and patterns of behaviour.
To make her think that she's nuts.
Do you know the single biggest predictor that somebody could escalate dangerously?
So you know exactly what to look out for.
Is that they are controlling.
More women are being murdered by their partners than ever before.
Introducing Kiss and Kill.
He used to call her princess.
To listen, search Kiss and Kill on the Listener app or wherever you get your podcasts.